So welcome to Building Wealthy Habits. Today, we are talking about complex estate planning and how do you know when you're moving from vanilla to something that's a little bit more complex. And for today's topic, we wanted to invite a friend of ours and someone who is an expert in this field, Blake Johnson. He is managing partner of trusted estate planning attorneys and a super lawyer, rising star ever since 2020, not to mention a whole other plethora of accolades. So he's quite an expert on the topic, and we love talking to him about how to introduce legacy planning, complex trust structuring for the benefit of your heirs, et cetera, et cetera. So Blake, welcome. We're so glad you're here.
Hey, thanks guys. Thanks for having me.
And so
All
you're
right.
in Utah, but you have multiple offices, right? What states do you operate out of right now?
Yeah, so we have physical offices in Las Vegas and then just south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And then I'm also licensed in Arizona and hopefully opening that up sometime this summer.
So good.
Awesome. So we're covering a pretty wide territory here with Jeremiah's background and California licensed attorney here. So so for any of our listeners in those areas, we've got you covered. All right. Well, let's dive in. Let's talk in general about kind of this transition. Blake, I'm going to prompt you with a question here, but what are some of the red flags? How do you know when you're talking to one of your clients where it's like maybe they had kind of a basic estate plan in place? How do you know? What are some of the triggers when you're like, we need to kind of look at the next layer of complexity here?
Yeah, I think for most people when they do their estate plan, especially if they're proactive and they did it when they're younger, their main focus was like who takes the kids and making sure the kids had enough to get, through until they were able to get a job and that kind of stuff. And so you have a lot of age-based distributions. It's just kind of pretty simple, like, hey, make sure they get to college, give them a third at 25, a third at 30, and a third at 35. And, for that basic setup, that's great. Like when you are in that position, you start seeing the transition as you accumulate wealth and your thoughts start to go to, I really don't want the kids to liquidate everything I've built. They don't know about how the real estate that I have. I don't want them to just sell it all and get a bunch of money from that. Or, I don't want my kids to just be living off the trust and doing nothing. I want them still to be productive members of society and do those things. Those are kind of the two main triggers. When you start having those thoughts that I see the clients start to change, we're like, okay, we need to do something a little bit more. Yeah, you have the estate tax side of things as well, but that's almost too late now because the exemption is $15 million per person. And so by the time you get to that, we're past those stages where you're concerned about those other things. Whereas, historically it was much lower. It was 2 million and 5 million. And so you kind of hit those at the same time. So that used to be our trigger, but now it's much sooner. We're worried about income tax planning. We're worried about entitlement. We're worried about liquidation, that kind of stuff.
Entitlement. I know we're going to circle back to that. I was thinking about, we talked about multi-state, you guys operating in the multiple states that you do, and just how that adds a layer of complexity if you're a business owner and now you're operating in multiple states. And then, we actually are onboarding a new client where it's like initially their business equity was maybe a couple million, but now they're looking at a valuation model that's 10x that. And so it just raises completely different questions when you talk about inheritance and gifting. It's like, wait. How and when do I want to gift my kids 10 million? Did I want to gift them 10 million? Right? Like the whole conversation shifts a little bit. So.
Yeah. And I think it's a good one too with people who are business owners. It's a long road to build a business, but a lot of times this conversation is right in the middle, and hopefully before, but right in the middle of that major growth curve to say, when they've just got the business, it's great. They're blinking their eyes and they realize they're going to be well past that, as a married couple, a $30 million valuation. They're going to be past that soon, but they're not there yet. And they're busy. They're moving. They're finding success. They're doing well. But then we start having these more complex conversations, say, hey, we need to revisit all this estate planning to see, one, not just what happens when you die, but how is this structure going to benefit you? And the idea of just as you said, Laura, the kids might get 10 plus million. That's a whole new thought, right? Or to say, we're about to go through this growth curve and get acquired maybe, or maybe sell the business. And what we thought in our heads was $1 million business is soon going to be a $40 million business. And those taxes are going to be meaningful. So what can we do now? And what I think is fun and hard about this space is they're busy. They're in the midst of life. They're in the midst of growth. Nothing's certain. They don't know if it's for sure going to be 40 million or 50 million, but they also think it might be. And so there's a layer of putting in complexity and structures, but also still having some flexibility. And that's where this gets people well beyond hey, my uncle's an attorney, he'll take care of it, or I think LegalZoom will help me out here. Like, this is when you need a specialist, someone who this is what they do, and they do it at the
Yeah.
type of level that the clients are headed towards.
So this is kind of a question to both of you, but as we talk about advanced estate planning, it's intertwined with complex tax planning as well. And both of you guys being an attorney, Jeremiah also a financial planner, like how do you approach a new estate plan or changes to the estate plan with the ongoing changes to tax law? Like, do you interface with your client's CPA? What does that process look like?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in, having the team. You have the financial advisor, you have the attorney, and you should definitely have your tax advisor. That should hopefully be a CPA. And the three of us should be working together because there is so much overlay there that it's going to help if we're all on the same page and talking the same language and moving forward with that same plan. It really has been interesting lately how the shift has gone from, yes, we still have estate tax planning to do, but it's become more of like, how do we help with income tax planning during their
Mm.
lifetime? Because that can be such a big part of the estate plan and help preserve and do all of that. But because it's not just strictly we're worried about whatever is over 5 million, now it's over 15, 30 million. Okay, that's a big gap. Most people aren't going to hit above 30. If they do, great, there's stuff we can do there, but it's that interim. Like, if we can save on the taxes before that, that's going to make them so much more likely to hit those estate tax numbers and have the success that they're looking for. And the biggest thing is you got to be proactive with it. As Jeremiah was saying, like, hopefully you've had this conversation before the big growth, because that's the most ideal time to do it. And it's interesting, a lot of times I focus so much on the entitlement and making sure that kids aren't spoiled and all that stuff. But on the flip side, recently I've had a few conversations with clients that they were trying to hold on to too much. Kids were in the business, working it, doing stuff, and they should have transferred shares. That was the goal. It says, oh yeah, we're 50-50 partners, but everything remained in dad's name. Well, then that causes so many problems when we have an exit down the road, because now it's all in dad's name. And now we have not only all the income tax goes to him, but now we have this giant estate tax. He wants to give half of it to the kid, but now he's going to pay capital gains tax and a 40% gift tax and, da, 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 da.
Yeah.
So like,
Yeah.
absolutely, there is so much intertwined there that you have to talk to everybody.
It really
Mhm.
is that perfect trifecta, Blake. I love that in fact, I had a newer client ask yesterday, like, so do you guys prepare taxes? And, wanting to say, like, you definitely need a competent tax preparer, right? That's a CPA. And sometimes they're going to bring you some ideas proactively that can benefit you. But if you have an attorney and a financial advisor together, you can talk about multi-year tax strategies that could literally save you millions in your overall lifetime tax liability. But that's strategy, right? So I had to kind of
Yeah.
tease out, like, we do the work on the tax strategy and we interface with the CPA to execute on that tax plan. So, Jeremiah, did
Yep.
you have anything about that perfect trifecta?
Yeah, no, I think Blake's comments are fantastic. I think we're in a day and age where information is not hard to come by, but the right information is extremely hard to find. And so
Mm.
it's a difference. What I tell a lot of people in this industry, when you Google something about a Roth conversion or some sort of certain trust, it's not that you get nothing; you just get a tidal wave of information. But to actually understand if this applies to you, if it's useful to you, if it's the best option for you, in my mind, ChatGPT, AI, these searches are just not there yet, and you need someone who is going to bring creative thoughts, but also like what actually fits for your situation. And I've had long conversations with the clients going one direction, and we realize they have a unique family dynamic, and that takes us in an entirely different direction, entirely different planning.
Hmm.
And on paper, it doesn't make any sense, but because the family, there's a dynamic there, it's like, oh, that's not actually going to work for you. It's this, and having that, whether it's the CPA, the attorney, or the financial advisor, there's pieces that each one of them brings to the table. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think having that team is such a great approach. And as rules are changing, as laws are changing, as opportunities are changing, finding a team that will keep up with that for a
Yeah.
client is so valuable.
Let's
Yeah, I
spend
think
a
the
little
biggest
time.
value
Oh,
that
go
we
ahead, Blake.
add,
Hmm.
as advisors and as attorneys and everything is they're not paying for us to like the actual execution of stuff. Like that is where ChatGPT can tell you exactly what to do. Like once you know what to do, how do you change a beneficiary form? How do you, execute, set up this account, whatever. That's not where they're paying for someone to read between the lines, hear all the information, and then put the best plan together for them for what all those things that they don't know that they actually have an impact.
Right.
That's why I still like doing an intake process in person. Yes, I could send out an intake to a client, have them fill out all this information, but I lose so much opportunity to hear and read between the lines and see, you see the reaction on their face. Tell me about so and so.
Mm.
Why do I need to talk about them? So those are the kind of things that really separate someone who knows what they're doing and is actually valuable versus just, an actual tax preparer or a legal Zoom or something like
Right.
that. Yes, they physically can do the same documents in theory, but it's not the same.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that we're kind of teasing out, like you're bifurcating, like what's the transactional part of the work that we do, and maybe the relationship that you had previously, right? Like we're talking to listeners who it's like maybe the team that used to serve you in a simpler moment in life or what your concerns were then. It's not that they didn't do a good job, it's just that they're not equipped for the higher level of strategy. And so, in the time that we have, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but I'd love to address some of these words and terms that probably people have heard of at this level of estate planning that maybe they're like, what is a step up? What is a grantor trust? What is, when you talk about complex trust structures, what are some of the structures that might benefit? Blake, I'd love for you to kick us off because I know you've done a lot of work here specifically, but yeah.
Yeah, it's we call it the alphabet soup. Every type of trust and strategy, it's all just, you have an idjit and a grat and a crut and a, just all these different acronyms that go on there. The reality is there's two different types of trusts that most people need to worry about. You have a revocable trust, which is what the vast majority of people have. That's the one to avoid probate. That's your estate plan. What happens when you die? That's the simple thing. You can change it. You can update it. Great. So that's what most people have. Then once you get to more complex stuff, then you have irrevocable trusts. And just like the name sounds, you cannot revoke it. You can't get rid of it. And in most cases, you can't change it. And so within that strategy, then, or within the irrevocable trust, there's a number of different types you have, and it's really just based on what is the purpose. Is it to gift it out of your estate? Is it for income tax planning? Is it for charitable purposes? And that's kind of what directs what those trusts are used for. So you may hear all these different acronyms out there, but really it's what is the purpose of the trust? And if it's one of those acronyms, it's going to be an irrevocable one. So you got to be a lot more careful with when you commit to that, like you're committing, it's not going to change. And so that's the big thing I try to tell people. Like they don't need to concern themselves with all those, what each one does. That's why you have an advisor and an attorney to know that stuff. You just need to know like how the permanence of it is going to be.
Yeah.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
really, really well said. And I think there's a element, especially when the land of irrevocable trusts, the land of this complex planning that, I'd say most people don't need. But as they move, business owners, especially as they move these more complex situations, they start to need these new structures. And the idea that it's irrevocable, I've had a number of clients that they have to pause. They say, hey, we talked through this. I see how this could work, but what if my kids don't want to work in the business? What if I get an offer to sell this and I go this way versus that way, right? It becomes really interesting of trying to create that flexibility in the midst of the income tax savings, the control, the charitable planning. And that's where when we put on one hat of an attorney, also the other hats of, which we would say we're therapist adjacent, right? We're not therapists, but there's therapy, there's financial planning, there's tax planning, there's family dynamics, there's purpose in
Mhm.
life and legacy and discussions, right? All of that, Blake, as well. I mean, we all find ourselves in these conversations that say, why are we talking about, how grandpa ran the farm? But we realize that impacts directly on the family dynamic and what the client
Yeah.
feels about retirement or their future. So
Mhm.
it's a beautiful space to be able to say the real value is not just, like you said, the document or even the great strategy. It's understanding how this is going to allow the flexibility as well as the savings, as well as the purpose to really
Yeah.
get carried forward into that family.
So we're going to get onto some of that legacy planning, but before we do, let's just, for our listeners who are business owners and maybe considering an exit down the road, let's talk about like what's the benefit of starting on that planning work, let's say 3 to 5 years before you exit
Mm.
for 30 million plus versus 3 to 5 months, right? Like what's the benefit of starting to lay the foundation and the groundwork?
So the big thing is, if once you've gotten really technically gotten an LOI, most of the time you can get away with it if you haven't signed an LOI, which is letter of intent to sell or to purchase. You limited the number of things that you can do at that point. And so, you're kind of stuck with however the structure is. If you can, look 3 to 5 years out and say, hey, this is the timeline, this is the plan. I might pay a little bit more in taxes by doing these certain things over the next 5 years. But at the exit, I'm going to reduce my tax liability significantly because I've done all these things in place and set it up so that my business gets a higher multiple. That's where the real strategy and help comes in, is because you can set that thing up to look as good as it can be, to make sure you have all the tax strategies in place, because the IRS, they're not dumb. They're going to go back and they're going to look, and they have tax rulings around how close to the exit that you did some of these transfers and different things. But if you do it years in advance, even a year in advance, you're far less likely to have an audit problem and to have all this stuff. Cause like, oh, nope, this was done prior. You had no idea that you were going to have an exit at that point because nothing was guaranteed. You didn't have even a conversation. So that's the real advantage. For instance, if you have a C Corp, there's a thing called QSBS. And if you've held the stock for 5 years and you meet all the qualifications, the first 10 million of the gain on that is capital gains tax free. Okay, well, that's worth, that's $4 million
Right.
that you're going to
Quick math.
save in capital gains tax. That is worth making it, changing to a C Corp, doing all the things, even though you may get double taxed on some of the stuff, to save $4 million. Most people are going to do that,
Right. Right.
but you
Net,
have to
net,
do it 5
multi-year
years
tax
out.
benefit. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
And you
Mhm.
can stack that if you do trusts for your kids or for your spouse and other stuff. So really, you could make your whole transaction capital gains tax free if you do it right and do it far enough in advance. And that's just one example.
That's so good.
Yeah.
I think the QSBS stacking, as is for most people is a very foreign concept. This even exists. But then if someone's operating a cash flowing business, often they'll say, "Hey, I need to be an S corp because my accountant talked to me and this is the best." And different structures, different purposes, different outcomes, but also for different futures, right? And so it's as attorneys and advisors, there's a lot of arrows in our quiver of what could be, but really finding what fits for this client. And to your comment, Blake, it could be that someone's running a business for 10 years in a certain way. And then all of a sudden they realize, oh, it's going to be time for a pivot. That pivot is 5 years away from now. Wow, what a great moment to be able to consider that, do some planning, do some structuring, and set yourself up for success. But it takes forethought. It takes people, being willing to hire the attorneys. I laughed when I was working solely at a law firm. We had one client that came back and said, "Oh, I don't like the legal fees. It feels like it's more." And then as we went through a transaction, there's a couple $1 million of savings due to one tweak we made in some of the tax structuring. And the partner at the time went back to him and was like, "Well, should we like split that, or what should we do?" Like, and joking, And the client, got the joke, was like, "No, I'll pay all your bills. It's totally fine. I get
Right.
it."
No more complaining.
Yeah, no one complaining. I'll pay your hourly fee. I feel really good about that. And it was just a good
Yep.
comment of the value that's
Yeah.
hidden
This
with a
is
good
stuff that
advisor.
happens on a major level. Like you think about Google, was it 5 or 6 years ago, they pivoted and became Alphabet for better structuring stuff. Like, so this isn't like you can't do it once you've met a certain point. Like they were one of the biggest, at the time, I think the biggest company in the world, and they were still able to pivot and restructure and do all that stuff. So it's definitely possible too, is what I want to
Right.
put that
At
out there for
any
people.
level.
Yeah,
Yeah, and the
that's great.
best estate planning is going to happen when it's not urgent, right? It takes some forethought. It takes being intentional to set up your team. So we talked about the benefit of you're going to have more flexibility on your valuation. You're going to have asset protection layering, income tax efficiency, not just for you, but for your heirs, leverage and structuring the deal overall. The last piece is we talked today, and we have Blake. Blake has really focused a lot. He's the host of Your Family Bank podcast, and this family bank concept is something that you've really been sharing a lot in terms of its benefit. And so when we talk about maximizing legacy planning, For business owners and for others, do you want to share with us a little bit about kind of your heart behind this idea of the family bank?
Yeah, I'll start with kind of sharing my experience with it. So, when I first got out of law school, in the time it took me to drive from Louisiana to Utah, where my parents were, both my offers were withdrawn.
Mm.
And so I was like, what am I going to do? Like, I thought I had everything lined up. My dad's an attorney. He's a estate planning attorney, but he never wanted to have employees. And so we lived with him for a couple months. And I was studying for the bar. And it took me 2.5 months to convince him to hire me. And so then he's like, hey, I have an office down in Vegas that I'm not really doing anything with because that's where I started out of law school. Go down there and see what you can do. You got 6 months to be profitable. Okay, great. I can sell. I just need someone to help teach me along the way. So time goes on to do that. We become partners. Um, and then we start butting heads because, like I said, he never wanted employees. And I wanted to grow. I wanted to have employees. I wanted to do all these things. And he was at a point in his career where he's like, I don't need that. I just want to coast. I enjoy my life. Less headaches, the better. And so it got to the point where he finally was just like, hey, just buy me out. I'm like, I would love to buy you out, but I got no money and the bank's not going to lend to me.
One problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so but he's like, I'll be the bank. You just pay me off over time. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, so we set up the terms, negotiated everything's, for an actual like third party transaction is just between the two of us. And so it was such a good experience. I was able to pay him off in 5 years. Now I have the firm that I wanted to run. I could do all the stuff that I want. He was happy because he got to spread out his tax liability over time. It also feels good, about helping me out. And then we also saved our relationship before it got really bad. And so like it was a win-win-win-win. And at the time I didn't realize that's what the family bank is. But then a few years later, I met a guy who introduced me to this family bank concept. And he's like, I told him, oh, I've done that. Like I've lived that. And he's like, well, then that's awesome. Like, can you help me put these into trusts and do all this stuff? And so that's when I started my journey with going down this family bank concept. And the idea is we just want to create some sort of accountability and stewardship with our kids and make it multi-generational. So that way, it's not just a dump money on the kids. Most estate plans, because it's easy to do it this way, we focus on the tax strategy and how to save as much money and pass as much money from one generation to the other, which is great. We can help with that if that's what's needed. The problem is we let that tax tail wag the dog. And most clients are like, well, I don't want my kids getting all this money. So what's the other solution? Warren Buffett is like, I'll give my kids, a certain amount, but the vast majority of my wealth is going to go to charity. Okay, well, is that really the right fit? Does that help your kids as well? Maybe, I'm assuming he's thought through this and had this conversation. But those were kind of the two things, like you either give it all to your kids or you give it to charity so it doesn't go to the government. And it's like, there's got to be a middle ground here. And so that's where this family bank concept is you have, you may have some money go out right to your kids, but you have the vast majority of it come into this, it's in this trust, and you have a board that oversees it. And the idea is the money is there to be borrowed from heirs. So they can get access to capital quickly. They get it at better rates. So that still gives them a huge step up, but they learn accountability because they have to pay back that loan. So they actually have to be producing, doing something with that money, whether that's starting a business, having rental properties, whatever, having a job so they can pay the mortgage back to this family bank. And then, so they get over that entitlement era, aura of like, hey, I'm just going to get this money, whatever. No, you're not going to get it. There's certain restrictions you have to do that. And as the more you do, the more you have access to. And then they also build that confidence of, hey, I was able to do this myself. Yeah, I had some help. And I said all the time, like I had a huge hand up, with having access and not having to go get a bank loan and all that stuff. At the same time, as far as my siblings know, like that was a big thing to me is I didn't want my siblings to think I was just given everything because then they'd be jealous and all of that. No, I paid for the business. And so there's a huge bit of stuff that comes with that. And then you can get a lot more creative in there with things like, okay, if you graduate from school and do X, Y, Z and have this grade and whatnot, then your student loans are forgiven. Or if you have a medical emergency, we can do a grant for that to forgive those things. You could even set up part of the funds that are paid back over time. The interest that's earned goes to, gifts for every time a baby is born within the family or anytime there's a wedding and those kind of things.
And
And then
this
you
can
can reinforce the
perpetuate, right?
charitable aspect of it too, of
Yeah.
a portion of that goes to charity and the kids are the ones overseeing it. So, and then it forces this family interaction as well, because you have this family board that
Mm.
oversees all of this. And
Mhm.
so they're interacting, they're doing stuff. I have clients who did things like they want family vacations paid for out of the trust profits. That's what it's used for. All the interest goes to that. Okay, well, now they have this family gathering. They know it's going to be taken care of. And in that family gathering, they're talking about the legacy. You know, how cool would it be if you had a video from grandpa talking about, here's what I set up, here's how I built my business, here's the values that are important to me, here's all the things that I did that were super successful, and you can draw on that. And so
Mhm.
I'm so passionate about it because
Mm.
it makes such a difference. If we can have these legacies and these thoughts passed on, we eliminate so much of the poverty and problems in the world. Yeah, the saying
Mhm.
goes, you go from shoestrings to shoestrings in 3 generations. One generation makes the wealth,
Mm.
next generation lives off it, and then it's gone by the 3rd generation. Well, if they're actually learning
Mhm.
how to build a business, how to be financially responsible, and so on, you're not going to have that issue. And so it's just
Right.
up and up and up and up and up. And so it's a great
Right.
thing to be a part of.
It's structuring accountability, and I love that. It's structuring the perpetuation of family values. It's, forcing ongoing relationship and communication, not force in like a negative sense, but it's providing a natural opportunity and platform for people to make agreement and business decisions, and how do we enjoy what we've earned and what we've made. And I think the point of it being multi-generational, this is truly a legacy structure going forward. I love that illustration of shoestring to shoestring, because
Mm.
you do see that, right? And you've got this huge population, the baby boomers all retiring, and the amount of wealth, right, that's retiring, and all that work that they put in. It's a different season now to build a business, and what people are asking for as millennials to be hired. It's a different season, but how do you structure accountability over the long term? So I love this idea of the family bank.
Yeah,
Yep.
and this isn't anything new, by the way. You know, you have the Rockefellers who've been doing this for generations, and that's why they're still
Yeah.
one of the wealthiest families, because they've kept it within trusts and taught their kids and done all that. Versus Vanderbilt, who was at the same time as Rockefeller, he just gave it to his kids and it was gone within 3 generations. They were all broke, and he was the wealthiest man in the world at that time.
Wow.
So it's a proven concept that isn't just something I came up with or that's within the last couple of years. It works. We've seen it work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. See
Yeah.
it play out. So
Yeah.
awesome. Well, I just realized we're out of time, Blake. We could talk for much longer. You've got a wealth of information and wisdom to pass on. Thank you so much for spending your morning with us on Building Wealthy Habits. We hope our listeners took something away from today. I'm sure they did.
Hey, thank you for having me.
We have a few more things to let you know about before we go. Podcast reviews really help us to serve more people and get this information into the hands of the people who need it. Please leave us a review, even if it's not 5 stars. We welcome the feedback.
And we invite you to let us know what topics you would like to hear more about, or what would benefit the people in your life who you're closest to. We have more resources online. Those resources are designed to help you share this great information easily with people in your life. To access those resources, please visit tricordadvisors.com.
Often we hear from clients that they wish they had talked to us sooner. If that's you, we'd be thrilled to see how financial planning can benefit your life. Email us at contact@tricordadvisors.com, or simply click on the link in the show notes.
This show was produced by Graham Gardner at Model FA. Find out more about how to create a podcast for your financial planning business by visiting modelfa.com. We love creating content that's useful, resourceful, and maybe even a little entertaining. We want to make this mega universe of financial topics and advice applicable and helpful to your life.
Remember, at Tricord Advisors, we are your future's best ally.